Joel Wolverton of the New American is joining us. He's also a speaker for the John Birch Society. Been on tour, it looks like, for a number of different issues, talking about nullification and the NDAA, and I believe habeas corpus probably too.
Right.
I'm very pleased to have you here and joining us today and talking about the Compact for America and Article 5 issues in general. For those that aren't familiar with Article 5, let me first read. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution reads that the Congress, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And in all of our history, we've never had an Article 5 convention. We had the original Constitutional Convention, and they gave us a fantastic document that's lasted well over 200 years, but we've never had an Article 5 convention. Joe, let me start here. How long should it take for us to call an Article 5 convention?
Well, I'm not one of these people. I do oppose an Article 5 convention, particularly for the causes currently espoused, that is to say, a balanced budget amendment. I believe that there are situations where an Article 5 convention should be called. For example, I believe that an Article 5 convention would be appropriate, perhaps, and like you say, there's never been one, so the precedent is non-existent. But I believe that perhaps there should be an Article 5 convention to stop Congress from doing things it should not be doing, as opposed to the BPA, which would encourage Congress to do something that they're not. For example, you mentioned the NDAA. I speak on that, and I think that the indefinite detention of Americans, I think that to have the states unite to say, whoa, we are not going to allow you to deny people their 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment rights without due process, I think that's completely appropriate. I do believe that the reason there hasn't been an Article 5 convention in our 200-plus year history is for reasons that were cited by the Anti-Federalists during the debate on the original Constitution in 1787, and that is it places that knife too close to the jugular vein of liberty. That is to say, when you allow partisans, in their parlance it was factions, in our parlance it would be corporate moneyed interests. When you allow these corporations with their big dollars and their million-dollar lobbyists to get inside, these corporate wolves, as I call it, inside the constitutional henhouse, it is going to be a bloodbath, brother. You cannot tell me that because it's an Article 5 convention, that suddenly these billion-dollar corporations who buy and sell senators like it's bubblegum, that suddenly they are going to decide to have clean hands and not participate. That, to me, is asking for what never was and what never will be. I think that to me, is the primary reason. The founders, on the other side of the issue, that is to say the Anti-Federalists, worried of opening that up to that sort of influence of faction. And I think in our day, people on both sides of the issue, whether it be progressives or libertarians or whatever, recognize that these big money corporate interests would have their hands, not only their fingers in that pie, they would have their whole hand and face in that constitutional pie.
Right, I think you're right. I think once we start talking about it, we do open up everything. I think it puts everything on the table up for discussion. But do you think that the founding fathers realized the danger that you're talking about when they created Article 5? Do you think that it was meant to be used often, or was the intended use to be only in case of where we're on the verge of revolution?
I think they intended it to be a counterbalance to federal authority. And in all of it, you have read, and most of your listeners likely understand the history of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. it was a constant struggle between Madison and his faction and those on the other side, to balance big state, small state, um, to balance state and federal, that is to say the central government, to balance their authority and to make sure they knew it was coming, it had to go for ratification. This Constitution was not handed down by God to Moses on Mount Sinai on stone tablets. It was not, it was going to be voted on. So Madison was a constant politician, knew that would happen, and thought, we need to protect the power of the states to have a say in the Constitution, and that was done. I don't think, and he himself explained, Madison explained, that it was a dangerous tool, but it was a tool that he thought the states should have. But of course, he also stated over and over again that to hold a second convention in the Federalist Papers and in his private correspondence, he explained that to have another convention you would not have lightning strike twice, to use a modern saying. Dan, you know as well as I do that if we're going to start looking for James Madisons and George Washingtons among our generation, we are going to get tired of looking.
I have to disagree with you there. I think that our forefathers had the benefit of opportunity. I think they had the opportunity to rise to the occasion, and with the gravity of the issues at hand and the reality that they had a nation to forge, that they got down to business, rolled up their sleeves, and they rose to the occasion. I think that when you take a look at the American history, we've had over nearly 700 state constitutional conventions, and each one of them has worked appropriately. We take a look at the original Constitutional Convention, and it works. We take a look at what happened in Iceland just recently, and surprisingly enough, when they got together, they talked just like us. Well, it's just, where do we meet in the middle? Where do we meet philosophically? And philosophically, it's a lot easier to meet rather than on a policy level, potentially.
I agree with that. And just Tuesday, I was talking to the representative of the Article 5 side, the pro Article 5 side, and, talking outside of the committee room, just, person to person. And and I said, look, I'm all for, we all agree that something needs to be done. I don't agree that this needs to be done, but I think we could get together. If we could get together as part of the Occupy movement, you understand this better than most people I talk to, certainly better than most of these legislators that I testify before, that we can get together as people, as human beings, as citizens of this nation, and we can work out a plan. We can get all of us in the same room, and we can work, key members of these two sides, and work out some kind of deal where we think we can do this that's acceptable to everyone. And the fact that Article 5 is so controversial means that there's something to it that's not going to get enough of our fellow travelers in the same room together. And as a corollary to that, or an extension to that is, and it's what I told the legislators Tuesday, is there is no legal precedent. There is no case law. And state legislators at this point, they are signing up for legal liability when these things are challenged in the courts for their constitutionality. And I think that would happen. I think we get challenges over everything in this country. And I think when it comes to opening up a constitutional convention, which regardless of what Rob Natelson or Nick Dranius or anyone says, is not in the black letter of Article 5, cannot be confined to one single issue. That when you do that, you are going to have constitutional challenges all day and all night. And I think there's an easier way. And the easier way, as you know, I think the easier way is nullification. But anyway. Mm-hmm. Right. And when Dranius and Rob Natelson, both of whom I used to be friends with until they started on me with this stuff. I think that when they say, well, Congress has a ministerial role, that's opinion. And they look at Alexander Hamilton and they say, well, a Federalist number this or that, 78 says Congress will have a ministerial role. That is Alexander Hamilton's opinion. And Alexander Hamilton's opinion, first of all, he's dead. Second of all, it's not law. There's not a single one of the Federalist Papers that are law. They may be persuasive and they may be well said and elegant and everything else, but they are not law. And when you get those guys together in that constitutional convention, like I said before, first of all, you have no control over them legally. When you say, when Dranius says, well, we'll make sure they swear out an oath to not do anything other than what they've been sent there for. Well, I've got news for you. Every congressman in Washington swears an oath when they're reelected and violates it every day. And despite him saying, Nadelson says, well, they would suffer ignominy at home and they would be run out on a rail. 90% of Congress is reelected every 2 years. I don't see that as persuasive to me. I think that we would be in a really dangerous position.
Well, I sure hope not. I think that once again, I think that the gravity of the situation, I think, lends itself to the responsibility to everybody. I've tried to conceive of what this would really look like, in modern times in 2013, and I can see where all these different groups would have delegates at this convention, and but the desire to come to an agreement, knowing that you have to get 2/3 of the assembly to agree to any of these things, that means that people like you and I that sit on basically opposite sides of the political spectrum are going to have to find areas where we agree in order to work together to achieve that super majority in the convention.
Well, two things. Number one, you and I are not paid for by multi-billion-dollar lobbyists and by corporate interests. I mean, you name me a couple of governors, which is, the Compact for America plan is to have it be the governors. Name me a few governors that aren't bought and paid for, number one. Number two, name me a state that doesn't get at least half of its budget from the federal government. When you're there sucking on the tit of the federal sow, you're not fixing to stab that pig, my friend. You are going to keep that pig producing milk, and that's what I'm afraid of. You got the corporate interest, the fact that these governors rely on Washington for their money, and the third fact is it'll be 2/3 of a quorum, Dan. I mean, the article that I wrote in the New American about the Compact for America, the little scenario, I don't know if you've read it, the little scenario I created at the beginning, that could happen. You could get some of these great governors who say, whoa, we're not authorized to do that. Fine, there's the door. Don't let it hit you where the good Lord split you. And we're going to start working on some better amendments, better in huge air quotes. Actually, I'd hate to have one of these Monsanto governors working on the Constitution.
Actually, your article and mine, it was amazing. I had not read yours. I doubt that you've probably read mine. We live in two different blog worlds, basically. And we both kind of started out the same way. And I think you really nail it too. What the problem with this is the governors. They are not They are not true representatives of who the people are. Right. George Washington admits in his farewell address he loved the Constitution, and he promoted it even in his farewell address, and basically told everybody that because it has the ability to be amended by the whole people, that it deserves our support. And when that's denied, it seems that it almost questions whether it deserves our support so much anymore. I see so much in the Constitution right now that is so completely ignored. Article 5 is just one of them. I assume you've probably seen the list of applications from all the different states. Over 200 years is over 600 applications. Some of them, there's a lot of conditions to some of these things, and those conditions were not met. But there's quite a few of these things out there that are standing applications that seem to be ignored by Congress, and let's take a look at the First Amendment too, just for example, the freedom of religion. That's very basic. Everybody agrees to it, but then again, we have the mosque issue in New York. Can we build a mosque that close to 9/11? Seems like discrimination to me. You talk about freedom of assembly, and we see people at the University of California, Davis, get pepper sprayed for sitting on a sidewalk in broad daylight. These are some very basic, fundamental, primary rights in a democracy. And these are being denied. I think, as you said too, habeas corpus, due process. A lot of these things are distorted. They're right there in our Constitution. Enumerated powers. Again, these are things that are, when you read them, they seem almost unfamiliar because that's not the way they are.
Well, that's right, and this is one of my principal contentions with the Compact for America. Is you want to have a balanced budget amendment. Why would Congress suddenly become so interested in what the Constitution says it can and cannot do? They regularly violate the First, Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments with impunity, habitually violate those amendments. And they would do the same. What would they do? They would say, well, we need to balance the budget, let's raise taxes. Or they would say, well, we're going to go ahead and legislatively de facto repeal the balanced budget amendment the way they de facto appealed the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments. And the first one, you mentioned the Freedom of Assembly, H.R. 547 completely denies the right of assembly and the right of speech. But Congress didn't never even reference the First Amendment in that bill, and they don't think they have to because they don't think they're bound. That's the problem. And the problem with the BBA as proposed by the Compact for America is that it instantly allows a 5% increase in the budget. It allows Congress to exceed the enumerated powers. It seems to me to be sound and fury signifying nothing, to be honest.
Well, again, this is where I think we agree quite a bit. But how do we fix this? I watched your speech at the John Birch Society, and you said that we need to enforce the Constitution that is there. And the problem I see is the layers of court rulings and laws and city ordinances that cloud the constitutional rights that we have. And it almost seems that we need a constitutional revival, in a sense that we need to reaffirm the rights that we have and say clearly to Congress and the Supreme Court that this is our Constitution. We decide what belongs in there, what doesn't, not the Supreme Court. And we need to say definitively and maybe update the language so it's not as arcane. But we need to say, it was mentioned at a conference in 2011 at Harvard that we almost need to take a look at the Bill of Rights and add an amendment to the end of each one of them that says, and we really mean it. Because they just ignore it. And it almost, to reaffirm that, would almost reset all that court ruling and all that law to what it really means.
I agree with you, and we're placed in a difficult position, but we're not in any more difficult position than our founding fathers were when they hammered out the Convention of 1787. There's a lot of problems. I think the biggest problem we face in 2013 is corporate interest. I think that we know that Wall Street controls Congress. And, when you have President Obama out golfing with oil magnates, and then with one side of his face and the other side of the face saying we need to control climate change, Come on, sir. You know, you can't have your unleaded and chew it too, so to speak. I mean, you've got to be either, as my grandma used to say, you can't be pig and puppy. You know, if you're going to be a pig, you wallow in the mud. If you're a puppy, sit on the lap and get stroked. And I think we have that problem. And I think the second problem we have is that we have been trained as a generation, the last few generations, to view every edict of the federal government as if it were etched in stone by the finger of God Almighty. We don't stand up for ourselves. Yesterday or Tuesday, after the committee hearing, a senator that was on the fence but voted with his Republican colleagues against or in favor of an Article 5 convention. He came up to me in the hall and he said, "What can we do? You know, fine, it's not Article 5, what can we do?" I said, "You know what Indiana can do? Here's something Indiana can do. Stop accepting federal money. You want to balance the budget? Do you want to do your part? You want to at least do something? Tell the federal government no." Because this isn't like a tax return, Dan. This isn't money the states are getting back that they put in. This is money being printed by the Federal Reserve. They are taking this money. We can balance the budget tomorrow if 38 of those states, you know, instead of coming together to tinker around with the Constitution, which frankly I believe does not need to be tinkered with, I say we just have these 38 governors refuse to accept the money sent them by their federal overlords. What do you think about that?
Personally, I would love to see a drastic change in the way we do our minting, the way we manage our currency, and I would personally love to see the abolition of the Federal Reserve. I think
Absolutely,
that,
but what are the governors? Let's say these 38. Let's have Nick Dranius and Chip DeMoss and all these, and they're good patriots, man. I am not running down these fellows the way they take shots at me. I recognize their patriotism and their intelligence and their historical knowledge. But let's use these millions that we're pouring into the Article 5 drive. Let's take this money and educate these governors and put pressure on them, real legitimate pressure, to say, don't accept federal handouts anymore. Take that money and say, no thank you, I'm ripping the check. A balanced budget, period. We don't need to tinker with the Constitution. Just, there you go, sir. Send it back in an envelope. No thank you. And why can't we do that? Why can't we do that?
I think that these guys, they get very dependent on that federal money. I think we even saw, you would admit, that Rick Scott in Florida shifting positions on Obamacare to accept the money. I think...
Yeah. Rick Scott in Florida, Jan Brewer in Arizona, Gary Herbert in Utah. They all were real ballsy when it was early days. But now that the rubber's hitting the road, they all want the check. They're like, yeah, that's fine.
It's got the carrot, you know. They got to go for it. You know, again, let's get back to those applications too. With all those applications, you're aware of those. Do you feel, if you're a strict constitutionalist, I kind of feel that we reached this threshold where Congress must call, and it does say that Congress shall call. It is basically, Nick Dranius is correct that it is basically a ministerial act. There is going to be some discretion involved there. They do have a vote that they have to cast, and they do have to represent their people back home. But at what point do we have to acknowledge that the states have demanded this? This is something that's just standing out there. Congress is ignoring it, and should we obey Article 5?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, for example, let's suppose in whatever bizarre world that Convent for America is successful, that they get the requisite number of states to sign on, and yes, I believe we have to call an Article 5. Congress has to call an Article 5 convention. I do agree with you. I believe that the letter of the law should be followed, and I would agree that has to happen. I pray that it doesn't happen, because I do not want those people tinkering with the Constitution, but I think it would have to happen. Now, with regard to the past petitions, That's a legal question. Unfortunately, it's never really been solved legally. We don't have any case law or any precedent. Um, and it is debated. I don't even really have an opinion for you as far as do I think, well, I guess I do. I don't think they should be adhered to. I don't think Congress should have to call a convention because there have been so many states in the past that have called for them. Because I think from moment to moment things change, and especially the winds of politics are so unpredictable. But I think if in a case, like I say, with Compact for America, if they successfully got this passed by the requisite number of states, then yes, they would have to call a convention. But I do quibble with you on that point of Congress's role. Article 5 in the Black Letter does not describe for us Congress's role. And I think if you think that Congress would sit back and allow the states to have unchecked power, then I don't think you're paying attention to what's happening in America. I mean, Congress they will not accept a second-class citizen role in the Article 5 process.
Right. Although it's not truly unchecked power. There's no power of the convention to amend the Constitution in the convention. It still must pass through 75% of the states. It must pass through Congress. Actually, there's some disagreement on that, whether it would have to pass through Congress again on a simple majority vote or not. But it does seem like there's enough checks and balances there, a backstop of the 38 states to stop any crazy amendments.
Well, you would think that, but the 16th and 17th and 18th amendments were all signed off on by 3/4 of the states. I mean, we have an income tax, we have the power of the states over the Senate, and we have the prohibition, which was all passed by the states. I mean, to me that's no backstop, because there's enough people in the state. When I talk, it's so funny. I speak to these conservative groups, libertarian groups, and half of them can't tell you what nullification means, for example, and it's a article of faith of the libertarian movement, but half of them can't tell you what it means. And to me, I don't say it to them at the time because I'm trying to help, but in my mind I'm thinking there is no wonder we live in the era that we live in of unchecked federal power, because people in the states just don't know. And even the ones that are fired up and want to be involved, most of them take a very superficial understanding, a very what I call Fox News understanding of the issues, and run with it. I mean, and as opposed to saying, look, let's stop for a minute. Let's, really get into this stuff. If you want to, and I do tell them this, if you want to be a James Madison, you're going to have to read what James Madison read. You don't have to agree with him at all, but you need to read the stuff he read and recognize that he and these other men were essentially coroners examining the lifeless bodies of the republics of the past to discover what the disease was that killed them. And I think once we find that, and I think, the sad, and I say this to people when I see them at these committee hearings, people on the other side that I recognize as really good people, it really disheartens me, Dan, in a very serious, personal way, to see so many of us divided. And I think that so many of us who are otherwise, in the same choir, singing off the same sheet of music, so divided. And I think that there is that's more than accidental. I think there are those who profit by our splintering, who encourage it one way or the other. I can't put my finger on it. I'm not going to point to some, smoky room where fat cats are planning to do this to us, but I think that's the effect. And it disheartens me. It saddens me that we can't find a way. And I wish we had a guy. I'm not that guy. But I wish we had someone, maybe 5, 10 someone, who could help us come up with a way that would unite us. Article 5 divides us. You can't argue. You can argue your point, and I can argue my point, but it divides us. Nullification divides us. So we've got to find that infamous Roman middle ground that can unite us all.
Again, I got to disagree with you on the Article 5 dividing us. I think it is the chance. Ron Paul even said in his farewell address at Congress, we need an intellectual awakening where we all get together. And I think that is the kind of environment that would foster that kind of
If it were me
awakening.
and you, Dan, if it were me and you and Dranius and Nadelson and Chip DeMoss and Ron Paul and Alexa O'Brien, if we were in that meeting, I agree with you. Because as much as we might disagree on some policies, I think we could get together because none of us are bought and paid for, to be
Right.
honest.
And I think that
Once you let politicians decide, politician is just a code word for corporations, and they're going to seek their bottom line.
yeah, I agree, and one of the things that let's get back to the Compact for America here too,
sure.
because what the Compact for America is doing by stacking the deck with these governors is basically hijacking what I perceive as what is expressed in the Declaration of Independence as the right of the people to alter or to abolish our form of government. And they're basically hijacking our power and selecting for us the elite most person of that state, basically, and sending them to this convention and taking the elites instead of the people is where I have to say, this is not it. Because if this gets to Congress, and let's say he gets his 38 states, and Congress looks at this and says, well, the required number is 34, that you've got 38 here, we have no choice. We have to call a convention. It's obvious. If they don't, basically every state that's part of those 38 states, I mean, that's grounds for withdrawal from the Union, I believe. But Congress still has the ability to approve or reject any agreement between any of these states. So let's say he successfully gets his 38 states, and Congress says, well, we have to call the convention. We've crossed that threshold. But we don't want to approve this compact. Mm-hmm. We don't approve this compact. We are going to have this convention. We're going to call it on our date, on our turf. They're going to select the time and the place. But the process of selecting the governors as delegates potentially has already been done. The damage has already been done potentially in these 38 states that if there is an open convention, suddenly you've got a stacked deck of delegates to work with. And that's where I really have some conflicts. I don't fear an open convention at all. Again, I think that it'll be an exercise in futility for a lot of really crazy ideas that are just going to fall by the wayside, that aren't going to get that much support, and people will end up being frustrated by the lack of amendments that are passed. They'll say, you blew it, you didn't pass this. So I see very few amendments actually getting out of this thing.
Well, you don't need many to dismantle the Constitution. I mean, the problem that I have, and I don't fear even the crazy amendments, even the disorganized, unwashed masses, what they might suggest, I would have much less to fear from them than I would fear from the organized efforts of people with billions to throw around. And I know that sounds like a broken record, but the fact is it's true. And to ask, a year ago when Dranius and Chip DeMoss asked me to join their board of directors and gave me the pitch, I said, we cannot put governors in charge of this thing. I mean, are you kidding me? You talk about wolves being asked to guard the sheep. That's just, to me, that's one of the fatal flaws of the compact, but there are several. And I am on record of my problems with it, but I mean, one of the fatal flaws, and I'll be honest with you, I said this to Nick Dranius, that and this was probably a bit too far on my point, but it is something I truly believe, is that I think when you start pouring your own money into this, pouring millions, or at least hundreds of thousands of dollars into this effort, there comes a tipping point, Dan, when it goes from being a principle to being propaganda. and you can't lose because you've got too much skin in the game. And I worry about that with regard to the Compact for America, that it's got to that tipping point where they've got so much skin in the game, they've got to do whatever it takes to get it passed, as opposed to saying, look, the federal government is in debt to the tune of $16-ish trillion. What can we do to really stop this? That's the number one thing. Number two thing is decentralization, which I told them at that time a year ago. That's where, as Agrippa said to St. Paul, almost thou persuadest me. I mean, that's where they almost had me, was a decentralization argument. But having the governors represent the states is not a decentralization.
Exactly. Yeah, no, yeah. And especially this cast of governors of any time in history, it seems like a ship of fools. Especially if you're a progressive like me, you're looking at people like Rick Scott, Rick Perry, John Kasich, Scott Walker, and it's just, to us, I mean, I can't imagine. I suppose to you it'd be like a parade of Jimmy Carters. If we had a whole bunch of Jimmy Carters go.
No, look, you know what, Dan, I'll be honest with you. I am not a Republican, as you hopefully know. And those men you named, the Kasichs, the Scotts, the Perrys, I don't find a Ron Paul among the group, to be honest.
That was actually leading me to one of my next points here, as you had mentioned that some of the biggest problems that we have in our society right now, and I have to put front and center the integrity of our elections. Mm-hmm. And I think it was demonstrated this last year that we have some extraordinary problems with elections. Ron Paul had a number of issues. The delegates from Maine were thrown out of the convention. Mm-hmm. It seems like there was some impropriety right away in Iowa.
Where you have, and Nevada and other states, yeah.
Louisiana, and I mean state after state, and that's just the primaries. Then we get into the elections. We've got allegations of electoral fraud, voter fraud.
But not just allegations, Dan. I mean, we've got proof of it. Now, whether, let's say this. As I was taught in law school, evidence is not proof, like a brick is not a wall. Mm-hmm. We've got evidence of voter fraud that, to me, is persuasive. I mean, to say that there might have been. I mean, there was. Now, whether it was concerted by those who would keep their hands on the buttons, I don't know. But I mean, there was pretty persuasive evidence of voter fraud.
Yeah, I feel that personally that voting is one of those inalienable rights, should be, and I even feel that people who are serving federal sentences for crimes mm-hmm. should still be allowed to vote. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that if you're an American citizen, vote. It's not one of those things where we have too many people voting.
No. Well, I don't know. See, we're going to disagree there because I don't agree with universal suffrage. But I am more, I guess you would say, sort of David Hume in my approach. In that, when he said that John Jay quoted him and said, "He who owns the country should run the country." I don't get a vote in Apple computer policy because I don't own a stock in Apple computer. And I feel that same way about the United States. I'm not talking property rights. I'm talking some other better metric for ownership. But I think that, to go back to the place where we walk down the street together is the integrity of the electoral process. And you mentioned, Maine. John Boehner stood up there at the Republican convention and read the results of a vote that hadn't been I mean, if that's not systemic official electoral fraud, I don't know what is. When it's on a teleprompter and the vote hasn't been taken, when he says the ayes have it and it's not happened, and it's been on there on that teleprompter for 5 minutes before the vote was taken. We've got real systemic and threatening issues with regard to our electoral integrity, and for that reason, men that you and I would look upon as constitutionally acceptable and morally consistent have a snowball's chance in hell of getting elected.
Yeah, and that's where I see a breakdown in our system, such a fundamental breakdown in our system where we've lost control. And I would even put it to you that you admit that our Constitution is ignored, and
Absolutely.
that we have an expansive military industrial complex that has a powerful influence on our country. And it almost seems to me as that our country has been subjected to coup after coup, and that we've drifted so far away from our Constitution that I've heard so many people talk about secession in the last 6 months. But it seems to me almost that our nation has seceded from the states. And again,
I made that point Tuesday that these legislators were arguing against nullification. I said, look, Washington nullifies you every day.
Right. And I it's one of those things too where do we really? Now you're against the Article 5 convention basically because it can open up the entire document. But the Congress has the same power. Now, do we really trust Congress more than a convention of delegates that are selected among the people?
No, I do not. But I think we have there are two things that distinguish the Article 5 from the power that Congress has. Number one, in light of what we just talked about with the electoral integrity, we do have control over who's in Congress. Now, do we exercise that control? No, because you know what? The reason we don't exercise that control is because as long as the Wi-Fi doesn't give out, as long as the cable is still on, as long as I don't forget my Netflix account password, I don't care, right? That's the generation we are. If I did a radio show the other night and had people calling, and I said, you walk down the street and ask 100 of your neighbors how many can name a single Supreme Court justice, but they can probably name all 4 Kardashians. That right there is a snapshot of the problem. But I think with regard to the difference in the power, I think we can still control who's in Congress, although we don't, and that's our own fault. And I think that there is still the right of states to exercise control, and we don't do that either, as we've talked about already. The Republican governors who stood up to, we're going to nullify Obamacare, and then all of a sudden they heal when the master calls. And I think that's the problem. I think we could do those two things. Number one, let's start controlling who we elect. And I don't mean in any extra constitutional way. Let's just vote. Let's just vote on people that we can agree with. And this is going to require, Dan, people like me and you and those who agree with us in eschewing labels. I would honestly rather vote for you for Congress, knowing that you are a progressive and believe lots of things that I don't believe in. I'd rather vote for you for Congress than vote for Lindsey Graham for Congress, for example.
Wow, that's saying a lot.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I think the reason is there are fundamental things. There are what we call first principles that many of us agree on. And like I said, we can talk about where to go with down the road. Let's talk about where we start from, and I think we can still control Congress. We can still do that if we want to, and states can still exercise control. Now, the John Birch Society hates when I mention anything about secession, but there would be no United States if the principle of secession wasn't a true constitutional with the small c principle. I mean, we exist because we seceded from the British Empire. And I think when you start looking at the long train of abuses that Jefferson listed, good night. I mean, every one of them, every one of the cars that train are rolling out of Washington D.C. every day, and despite what people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain and John Kerry and Barack Obama preach, we have less to fear from militants on the Tigris and Euphrates than we do the militants on the Potomac.
Yeah, that's I have to agree with you on pretty much every point there. It's just what to do about it. If we can't vote our way out of a solution potentially.
But we can do that. We don't, and I think we're not going to, and unfortunately. But I don't think any. Look, it's all academic, and I don't. This is the part that bothers me when we talk about this. Is I don't want to do the academic historical saber rattling. I don't care what James Madison said about Article 5. I do not. Do I care as a constitutionalist? Do I care as a professor of government that has to teach this class every day? Yes, I care. Do I care as a matter of saving our republic? No, because it doesn't matter. What matters is what can we really, really do? And it's mostly academic. I think in a realpolitik way, the best thing to do is start controlling the elections and start not returning, don't ask Congress, don't file a petition saying if you don't start shaping up, we're going to nullify or secede. Just do it. For once, let's see someone standing on the foundation of personal, popular sovereignty.
I don't think it's all academic anymore either. I think that we have the benefit of looking at what Iceland just did, and able to see and kind of follow their lead, because they had the same problem we did.
Right.
How did we react? We bailed out banks. They didn't. And I think we can agree that those bailouts should never have happened.
Right.
It's a banking problem. It seemed to be a conspiracy of credit default swaps and very elaborate financial instruments, which kind of put us into this position. And I think that the control and influence over Washington dominated the day. And in Iceland, they'd had a chance to take a pause and really think about it for a second, and decided, no, we don't want to do this. And they decided, boy, I think their constitution was maybe 60 years old. Ours is over 200 years old. They decided it's so old, we need an update. And they got together and they crowdsourced their constitution online and basically debated everything ahead of time, arrived at some kind of consensus, and tried to push their constitution through. And then the court rejected it and said they didn't follow the right process. So they started from the beginning and basically reaffirmed everything that they had already basically decided on before. And now they're in their final stages of ratifying a new constitution. We don't have the ability to create a constitutional convention in our constitution. We do have the Article 5 process. Is there a completely safe way that you can imagine that that we can do this and not derail our country, not see the abolition of our Bill of Rights? I mean, there's nothing like that coming from the left. I don't think coming from the right you're going to see anything pass that's going to throw out our Bill of Rights or anything like that. There's just nothing popular, no popular push for anything like that. What do you think would be the best safeguards that may not exist right now that could make the Article 5 process usable and possibly reflect the attention that our forefathers were getting at, that create the kind of situation that they had hoped for?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know. I would like to see it. If we're just speaking on first principles, of course I agree with the fact that Article 5 exists. I think, and as I said at the very beginning, I think there are times when such a convention would be appropriate, but I think it's disingenuous to say, and not on your part, but on those principally promoting this, I say that it's disingenuous to say, well, for example, in Compact for America, we want a balanced budget. No, what you want to do is have more say in the imbalanced budget, unfortunately. Because if you were sincere, and I know you won't agree with this probably, but if you were sincere in wanting the budget to be completely balanced, you wouldn't talk about, a 5% increase. You wouldn't talk about tax increases in your amendment. You would use your amendment to say the following expenditures for fiscal year 2012, for example, were unconstitutional per Article 1, Section 8. And you would list out every entitlement program, every $1 billion contract given to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. You would list every constitutional program and policy and say, these are unconstitutional, therefore are null, void, and of no legal effect. And next year, should you attempt them again, they will be held as such, and we will refuse to enforce any federal dictate inside the borders of the sovereign states. But they don't do that, and I think that's the big failing. And do I wish something could be done? Yes. Do I wish we could decentralize power? More than you know. Do I think the C4A accomplishes that? Not no, but no.
Now, do you feel that the Compact for America is basically an attack on Article 5 then, because they're refiguring the process?
I think the article, look, and I said this in my article, so when Dranius watches this, he's not going to be surprised. I think that they rewrite the Constitution in several signal ways. I mean, they rewrite Article 2 in the Compact for America by giving power to the president over budget issues. That's, to me, hey, whoa, that right there is enough of a red flag for me to bail out of the Compact for America.
Me too, actually. That's
and when they talk about governors, that's another. I'm like, come on, guys. And so I don't think it's an attack on Article 5. I don't think, and to their credit, now I have to say this because I'm not in it for me, Dan. I'm really not. But I think that when Dranius and Chip DeMoss came to me and said, look, will you look this over and tell us what we can do to improve? I did tell them a few things, but to be fair, they did ask me that. But I think now, like I say, they've got a lot of skin in the game, and they don't want to lose face or the millions or hundreds of thousands they spent on this. So, but I think that perhaps we could get someday, some way, to use Article 5. And it's going to take nuance, Dan. It's going to take a guy, look, who can we get to unite? Did Ron Paul not unite the left and the right in a way we've never seen in political history? Absolutely. When would you have voted for him for president?
It's hard to say. I was very undecided through most of the election and couldn't decide until the very end. So
right, but
have that. It would have been a tougher decision. It would have been a much tougher decision.
And lots of people felt that way. That's my point. I mean, it's going to take something like that to unite us. And unfortunately, for all their noble and worthwhile effort, Compact for America just fails. And it's too many people are taking it personally, and I don't mean it personally. What I'm saying is, I want to decentralize power too. I want to rein in the federal government. I want to restore power to the states. Compact for America does not do that. Period. And it fails, like I said, on a few very critical constitutional fronts. Primarily being endowing the governors with that power. Secondly, rewriting Article 2 to give the president power over expenditures.
That is stunning. To basically, in a two-party system, if one party controls the White House and the Congress cannot agree to a balanced budget, it says it'll turn over budgetary control over to the White House to cherry pick and slash, basically handing over the checkbook of the United States to the president and fundamentally changing the way our government works from here on out.
Right. Yeah.
And
I can't get behind something like that. I don't care if the president has an R or a D or a I after his name. I can't get behind that.
I totally agree. I think we'll end up getting the short end of the stick no matter which party, is there. I think the common people will always.
And it exposes not only the Compact for America, any convention that were held under its auspices, it also exposes state legislators to legal liability. Not tort liability, obviously,
Well,
but constitutional liability for having participated in it. It would never hold up. I mean, you cannot, well, I say it would never hold up. Of course, things that I thought would never happen have happened. There's, a 16-year-old American was executed on order from the president. So, without
allegedly.
due process,
Yeah, again, the entire process, I think, what they're proposing only begs the question: shouldn't we be able to deliberate this? As a progressive, I still like the idea of adding some language that would require a balanced budget. I'm not terribly opposed to the concept, but what they've got on paper there is something that I cannot agree with, and you cannot agree with.
No, it doesn't balance the budget. It allows for a budget increase. It allows for tax increases, and it permits Congress to spend money on anything Congress wants to spend money on. Those three things, that's a powerful combination that will KO the American middle class, I'm afraid. And it punches holes too large to be reconciled in their proposal. But now, as far as balancing the budget, Congress is already required to balance the budget because of something called enumerated powers.
Right.
And if it exceeds the enumerated powers, then it is null, void, and of no legal effect. However, we don't have anyone in this country, we don't have enough people in the country with the stones to stand up to that. Unfortunately, we are all accustomed to asking how high when Washington says jump.
We talked with Judge Brennan, former Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court Chief Justice, and we talked to him about Article 5, and we had to ask him, if Congress won't obey the Constitution, what are you supposed to do? And he said basically that it's up to the people to enforce the Constitution. And
Right.
boy, that is a head scratcher, because what are we supposed to do? When it comes to, let's get back to the enumerated powers and coining
Right.
money. What are we supposed to do about? We the people say, and the Fed. It says right there in the Constitution that Congress is supposed to be responsible for this, but they've delegated this responsibility to the Federal Reserve. How do we, without
Right.
really an
Using
amendment, how do we get rid of this?
Well, there's two things. Number one, I think, we don't have anyone in this country who you would ever imagine uttering the phrase, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." Who is willing to do that today, Dan? No one.
Oh,
Very few people. Let's put it that way.
I talk to a lot of vets, that have served
in that way. I'm talking about in a direct opposition to federal tyranny.
No, they're in my group. They're in our group.
Well,
they're
I'm
very.
talking about in. Oh no. Between the yous and me's of the world, yes, I'm talking about those in political authority. Very few, and I think that's the number one problem. Number two is, I wrote a book recently about nullification, and in there I explained that individual nullification is not as constitutionally sound as state nullification, because in the entire history of the America as colonies and as states, we've never opposed tyranny on an individual basis. We've always opposed it either as colonies or as states. And I think that working in our collective capacity as before as historically as colonies and today as states, I think we're on firm constitutional footing there. And I think it helps our cause, Dan, if you think about it this way. What it essentially does, do you remember the story of Lenin after the revolution in Russia? He he was having a big meeting, a big rah-rah, hey, we won meeting, and one of the guys says, hey, that's all fine and good, we won, but Russia is enormous. How are we going to enforce the principles of Bolshevism in far-flung hinterlands of Russia? And Lenin told a boy to go get a broom, the old straw kind of broom. The boy brought Lenin a broom, and Lenin took two or three things at a time, two or three straws at a time, and broke them until the entire broom was broken. And he said, that's how we do it. We don't break the entire broom. We break two or three straws at a time until the entire broom is broken. And I think that theory can help our side, because I think we could say, all right, we cannot control Congress. We cannot. Let's just all agree we cannot control Congress, because I personally don't have billions of dollars to give to anyone. I don't have thousands of dollars to give to someone. But what we can do is we control our districts, and we can maybe control our states. There should be an occupy, in quotes, because I don't want anything to be official that way either. But let's occupy Utah. Let's occupy Hawaii. Let's occupy New Jersey and get it done state by state. We don't need to control Congress if we can control our states. And I think we have a better shot at that. I mean, we do have examples. I mean, Ron Paul was elected numerous times from his district. So, we can occupy our districts and get it done that way without, and do you see the glory of this? The genius of this is it doesn't end around the corporate interest, because although they can control Congress, they're not going to control me. They're not going to control you. They're not going to control those who we can get united enough to control our districts. If we control our, it's like the old song says, if you can change a vote, you can change an election, and you can change the world. If we can change our district, we can change our state, and we can change Congress that way. And I think that's the way to do it, because I think Article 5 is, you're letting the wolves in the hen house, Dan. You're asking them to come in. And I think we can do it on a more popular level if we use federalism as our weapon.
Well, I agree with you in the sense, but who are the wolves? Really, who's going to get elected? If you're representing Koch Industries, mm-hmm. and you're running as a delegate, mm-hmm. You've been nominated. How are you going to get nominated, first of all, and then get all these people to say, oh yeah, we want this guy from the Koch Industries? It's going to be people advocates that are out there that are going to be pushing for things like in the Fed. This is a different kind of election too. This isn't Republican versus Democrat, mm-hmm. which people don't seem to care much about. This is going to be stuff about, is a corporation a person? Should we end the Fed? Nullification, electoral college, that kind of stuff. I think people are going to, hey, that's a reason to get up out of your seat and go down and vote. So
you would think that, but the incumbency rate in Congress doesn't bear that out.
Right. And I think that's one of the problems is the turnover in Congress, and the way that these guys are career politicians has influenced their day-to-day judgment. And where you get a whole bunch of people together for a convention, you're not really a career politician.
No, I agree, but we can use our biennial elections as a substitute, as a surrogate for this convention that I think is too dangerous. Get together. You want to get together? You want to have enough influence? Get together, influence your friends, and get someone to run. Now, yes, it's not going to happen this next 2 years. We're not going to flip Congress. But look, let's be patient. Let's not be patient in the sense that we don't care. But let's have a long-term goal of getting these people elected, and do so day by day, working to circumvent these career politicians by using federalism as the weapon. And I'll tell you, there's lots of these people who think that federalism protects the incumbency rate. In fact, if used correctly, it is its biggest threat.
Well, just the track record of Congress is that there's not a lot of turnover. It's like 90% right. incumbency rate, something like that. So it's just kind of one of those things where I just don't have a whole lot of faith in these career politicians. I would rather And Nick and I, when we were talking about it, he made a great point about the states being one vote in this convention, and I fully agree with that. It says 66% has to pass. Right now, that's 34 states would have to agree to anything for it to pass. And it's again one of those things where you try to imagine what this thing would really look like in the year 2013. And I really like the way Sandy Levinson talks about this issue, and he says what you'd want to do is you want to keep the delegates at home in their home state, and so they can talk to the citizens that sent them there, to the delegation at night, maybe in the local diner or something like that, say, hey, we're talking about this. And he also had mentioned that the number of delegates was up to each state. Now, when you're in the convention, since Nevada can send 300 delegates and New Mexico is only going to send 3, it would really throw it off unless you gave each state one vote.
Well, you think that, but I mean, read the record of the Federal Convention of 1787. That didn't quite work out. You had them saying, well, let's have New York have 10 delegates and South Carolina have 3, but we all have. No, that didn't work out, and it wouldn't work out in Article 5. You talk about being a progressive. The progressive constitutional challenge to this thing, based on the one man, one vote principle, would last a decade, because you're not going to tell me that Nevada should have the same vote as California.
Well, it's right there in Article 5 that we cannot infringe upon the equal suffrage of the states of the Senate. Basically, it's the same situation for the convention. You can't infringe upon the equal suffrage of the states.
Good luck with convincing the courts to throw out the one man, one vote policy. Good luck.
Well, you do. You get to vote, but it would go towards the tally of your state. So.
Well, that's as indirect as it gets. I mean, the whole Supreme Court history of one man, one vote did not accept that premise that, well, we are voting, we're doing it by state. I'm just saying, and I'm not saying that this is the gospel truth. I'm just saying that is a potential constitutional problem, because I can see that as a problem. When I read the history of the Convention of Philadelphia in 1787, I feel for those guys in the small states and say, hey, yeah. But I also see where Virginia is saying, wait a minute, if we've got 10 million and you've got 1 million, guess what? We get 10 times your vote. Because when it comes to a balanced budget amendment, Dan, you're talking about the money. And when it comes to the money, when they start handing out the bills, Nevada with their 1 million residents are going to be like, hey, we're not fixing to pay the same amount. California's got 20 million people. You see the point.
Well, yeah, and I think it basically reinforces the idea that this is a republic, that this is the state sending delegates. We're basically governed. We have some limited amount of democratic control in this, but it is an arcane system. It's not ideal for a lot of people, and I think again that underscores the need for an update. We need to modernize. We have a lot of modern issues that don't address that aren't addressed in the Constitution. And should be, like medical rights and internet privacy.
Absolutely. And some of that stuff we're going to agree on and some we're not. But the point, what we can agree on is, even when the Constitution was written in 1787, those principles that they, put into that document were thousands of years old already. I mean, if you read the months before Madison went to Philadelphia, he made that, he drew up that study, the study of confederacies, ancient and modern. And those principles that he put in there were principles that he distilled from the histories of the Roman and Greek confederacies, and Switzerland, for example, and Holland and Venice. These were things that were already hundreds, thousands of years old, even when they were put in the Constitution. So when people say, well, the Constitution is outdated, no, the Constitution isn't outdated. What's outdated is our ability to think deeply about these things and apply these timeless principles to our modern problems. I think the same way you could make an analogy with the whole drone assassination thing. You could say, Lindsey Graham will say, well, he's a bad guy. Well, yeah, but the Fifth Amendment says no person, not no good person, shall be denied. you know. So anyway, I think it's the same thing. I think we can apply timeless principles to modern problems. And, just to bring it back around, I want there to be something, and I applaud Nick Dranius and Chip DeMoss and Rob Nadelson for trying, but this is not the right way to do it for the reasons I've said earlier.
Right. See, I had another question here. Nick Dranius had a couple of questions that he wanted me to ask you, but I think we already covered those. Ask him whether he believes that the same circumstances that warrant revolution are required before using the Article 5 convention process. And you said no on that.
I did answer that, but I will reiterate. I think that I would say almost, but I would say before we even get to that question, there is a threshold question, and the threshold question is what is the more proper use of Article 5, and I don't think that a balanced budget is the proper use because of enumerated powers, and B because of nullification, and C because the balanced budget amendment drawn up by the C4A does not do what it proposes to do, and it effects a radical rewrite of Article 2.
You do believe that the founders did intend for us to use Article 5, though?
That's a loaded question. Do I believe that they believed in the principles in Article 5? Yes. Do I believe they intended for us to use it? I doubt it. Now, in the sense that they probably weren't. You got to understand, 1787 in Philadelphia, that was a roll-up-your-sleeves realpolitik situation. And you read the record, and often, people would get up and say, look, brother, I appreciate how you're going to spout Solon and Euripides and Polybius to me, but we're talking about running a government, and I think that's what we need to remember. I think that there are realpolitik considerations that we have to make, and I think that did they intend for us to use Article 5? I don't know. They intended for states to retain numerous powers and give a few undefined powers to the federal government, and that hasn't happened. So whether they intended it, I don't know. I don't know.
It is questionable. I mean, Marbury versus Madison came up right away, and that really changed the effect of the constitutional, the convention in our Constitution, and I gave the Supreme Court almost unlimited the ability to reinterpret our Constitution in ways that just don't seem to be there.
And yet, yesterday was the anniversary of the decision in Peterson versus U.S. in 1809 that said that the states can't nullify federal decisions of the federal judiciary. I mean, from Jump Street, we had problems,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And
we let it slip through our fingers fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's a difficult thing when you're talking about, and right here I'll put a disclaimer, the following is not the opinion of the John Birch Society, the New American, or any affiliates or thereof. But I just am not as rock-ribbed hewed to the notion of an American Union as other people are. I would like to see people be allowed, Dan, to vote with their feet. I think if, let's just use an example. Let's say that Texas, just to use an example, decides to secede, or short of that, if Texas decides to nullify every unconstitutional act of the federal government, let's let people vote with their feet. I would move to Texas, my friend. I'm going to tell you right now, I would move to Texas because I don't care if they call it the Republic of Texas or whatever of Texas. I would move there because I think would be somewhere I'd like to live. I mean, I've been approached numerous times to be a part of this the Free State New Hampshire project, and I'm almost persuaded about that too, just because I like the notion of voting with your feet. If you don't like the way the union is being run, get out of the union. I mean, I'm all for that. And again, asterisk, not the opinion of the John Birch Society.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if I should get out of the country while I still can.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we have the ultimate right. I mean, we exercised that right in 1776, and we have that right in 2013 as a matter of political philosophy and as a matter of real political power. Get out of the union if you don't like it. Look, I don't like the way the union's being run. I don't have enough authority or power yet to affect any sort of change in that sense, in a radical sense. But I do have the power to say, yeah, we can nullify this stuff. I can show you where we have that power and where. But do I think it's ever going to be done wholesale? No. I do not. Do I pray that it would be, and do I spend every day, all day, trying to affect that change? Yes, I do. But at the end of the day, you just got to go with what you go with the one that you think is going to do the best job, and I don't think that C4A does that, or Article 5 Convention does that right now. I think there are better, more lasting ways to do that. Hercules could have gone in with a shovel and shoveled the manure out of the stable, but what he did was divert the river and have the whole bloody thing washed away. And I think that's what we need to do right now.
Well, I think it's amazing how much we agree. I think that's it's very striking in this conversation. What's that?
I don't think it's amazing. No, I don't think it's amazing at all. I think in the post-partisan world we live in, you and I are going to agree on a lot more than you would think, because we both, fortunately, which is a credit to you and to me, to be immodest for a minute, that we're trying to look beyond those things that have divided the left and the right in the past. Because we live in a world where those things have become real to us. Our parents did not experience this the way we are.
True, very true. I got to get going here, though. But
Okay.
I do want to thank you for your time, and I think it's great that we can talk about these things. I think it would be great for us to touch base again a little bit later on to kind of reflect on how the Compact for America is doing, if they are successful or fail. I think we should, especially coming from two different perspectives. It's really interesting that, because I know that the Compact for America basically designed their plan to appease the John Birch Society and Eagle Forum and address a lot of the arguments that they had. So having their opposition out there to this when they've tried so hard to get you guys on board, that it's amazing that we still find ourselves opposed to this particular action, but we agree on so much that there will be something. There's so little difference between how we want to solve it.
Something come down the pike. I mean, unfortunately for Nick and Chip and Rob and them, the problem that we have now is there's flaws that are too big to be ignored. I mean, I can hold my nose on something, but I can't hold my nose when it's governors being given the power and Article 2 being rewritten. I can't do that.
It does seem as though there's an ulterior motive here in play, and it almost seems to me that I'm much more concerned about the process of selecting delegates being forever changed in a lot of these states, and wonder if that's the actual goal, or do they really hope to get this amendment through that really changes the way the executive branch operates and the Congress operates, and
too many questions, too few answers.
I've had some that took a look at this, and that they said that it almost seems as though they want to change the role of the president to a Caesar, so that they have a totalitarian entity up there that runs their global empire. So it's very strange, because it doesn't seem as though it really does address the balanced budget very much at all. It's more
No.
that it seems like there's a different goal there at hand.
Absolutely.
But again, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to talking with you again in the future, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dan. Anytime you need me, I'm here for you, brother.
All right. Aloha. Thanks again.
Aloha to you. Take care of yourself.
Perhaps a super persona could go to chill on my elbow and let me dance to the tune of the sirens as they get closer. It's holding breath like it prevents death, though it slows the pulse and no, it comes in waves at bitterness space. Place in every passing phase that paves the path for a winter so cold it'll freeze your ass, but only with the blink of an eye, the length of a breath, standing in between the audible frequencies you got left like you're banging on aluminum. You're banging on aluminum. turn. Here it all will thrive, and in the end, you just you just want something. We just want something. We just want something.